You climb stone steps so cold they bite the soles of your feet. The dawn air smells of pine sap and smoke. Somewhere above, a bell tolls not for prayer, but for accounting. Each echo feels like the closing of a ledger that already bears your name. Before we begin, take a breath. Look where you are, maybe in Lahore, maybe in New York, maybe somewhere quiet where morning has not yet decided what it will become. Isn't it strange? Across oceans and centuries, people are gathering here in this same fragile moment to remember a boy who once climbed those steps. If you're watching, tell us where you stand in this vast world, because every bell in this story tolls for all who have been sold, forgotten, and renamed. The temple at Mount Koya rose out of the mist like a sleeping animal, stone ribs, wooden skin, and breath of incense. Its monks, wrapped in gray, moved like ghosts between prayer halls, their sandals whispering across polished floors. They would say the morning belonged to Buddha, but in truth it belonged to trade. In the village below, markets stirred long before sunrise. Grain weighed, debts tallied, and sometimes children measured not for height, but for potential. A mother named Ose once stood in the candlelight of a rice merchant's home, her youngest boy pressed against her skirt. Her husband had been taken by the plague. The landlord had come twice that week. She counted out 24 coins, thin, dull, insufficient. The merchant's wife offered her tea. "The temple is generous," she said softly. "They teach the boys their letters. They feed them well." Ose nodded, though her eyes never left the flame. The deal was not written as a sale. The monks had another word: dedication. A pious offering, they called it, one that would bring salvation to the family. The paper bore a seal, crimson and round like a drop of blood. By dawn, the boy was walking behind a merchant's cart, clutching a parcel of barley cakes. He thought he was going to learn to read. He did not see his mother fall to her knees when the road bent and he disappeared behind the cedar grove. Inside the temple, the air was colder. The senior monk, Shune, recorded each arrival with the care of a tax collector. "Name?" he asked. The boy hesitated. "No name," the monk decided. "You will answer to Joan." He lifted the child's chin, examined his teeth, and nodded approval. "Good bones," he murmured. "Strong lungs." Then, to the scribe, "Mark him fit for instruction." Instruction, in this place, meant obedience. The boys rose before the sun, washed in the stream, and knelt until their knees burned. They copied sutras until the characters blurred, their hands cramping around reed brushes. Sometimes a hand would rest too long on a shoulder. Sometimes a prayer lesson would end with a closed door. None spoke of it, for the monks called it enlightenment through affection. At evening meals, the boys sat in silence. The scent of boiled millet mixed with incense. The walls were painted with saints whose eyes seemed to follow them. Behind the kitchen, scraps of laughter and something like weeping drifted through the wooden screens. Joan learned to keep his gaze on the floor, to move soundlessly, to say yes even when he did not understand the question. Beyond the monastery gates, the economy of devotion flourished. Families sent coins, rice, and cloth in gratitude for their sons' spiritual progress. Merchants donated timber for new halls, believing it bought them virtue. No one asked how the boys lived, only that prayers were recited on schedule. Ritual became currency, salvation an investment. When Joan turned 13, Shuni presented him with a robe of blue silk. "You serve now in the inner hall," he said. The child bowed. The robe shimmered, too fine for his thin frame. That night, as candles sputtered low, Shuni placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are blessed," he whispered. "Few are chosen for such closeness." Outside, the bell rang again, slow and hollow. Years later, villagers spoke of the temple's beauty, of its discipline and grace. Pilgrims arrived to see the golden statue in the upper hall. None noticed the rows of sandals, small and neatly paired, lining the steps like offerings. Some of those sandals belonged to boys who ran away, vanishing into forests where snow hid their tracks. Others grew old inside those walls, their silence mistaken for devotion. The records list them only as chigo, attendants, never as sons. And yet, sometimes when the bell rang at dawn, an echo traveled down the mountain, a sound too human to be mere metal. The villagers said it was the wind, but those who had once climbed the cold steps knew better. It was the sound of names still trying to return home. You straighten your kimono and answer to a man whose orders shape whether you live or die. The lacquered armor gleams like wet ink in the morning sun, and beneath its smell of oil and sweat lingers another scent, sandalwood and longing. In the court of the samurai, beauty is not a weakness. It is a weapon sharpened by obedience. The temples had whispered of discipline. The samurai made it flesh. What began as ritual affection among monks descended the mountain trails to the barracks and palaces of Japan's rising warrior class. There, boys called wakashu became both students and adornments, their youth treated as both promise and possession. The art of loyalty, the generals said, began with surrender. In the domain of Lord Katayama, the clang of practice swords rang across the courtyard like a clock marking each blow. Dust hung in the air, thick as breath. Rows of boys bowed low, waiting for inspection. Katayama's steward moved among them, his scroll unrolled. "Strong shoulders," he muttered, touching one. "Too old," dismissing another. When his gaze fell on a boy named Rintaro 15, slender and precise in his movements, he nodded once. His wrist is steady, his gaze too proud, perfect for refinement. Refinement in this place meant a life lived under constant command. Rintaro learned to polish armor until his reflection blurred inside the steel, to pour sake without spilling a drop, to answer every command before it finished leaving a lord's lips. Morning, he trained with wooden swords until blisters opened like flowers across his palms. Each night he brushed the dust from his robes and recited poems of loyalty beside his master's chair. Letters from this period survive carefully folded, sealed in wax. In one, Katayama wrote to another lord, "The boy moves with the quiet of falling ash. To correct him feels like striking art itself. His form pleases the gods, his silence pleases me." The letter reads like a craftsman describing a newly forged blade. There was no open shame in these words. In the samurai code, desire could be rephrased as mentorship, tenderness as discipline. A wakashu's worth lay in how perfectly he embodied both the grace of submission and the courage of the warrior. They were told, "Your body is an extension of loyalty, your silence, proof of faith." During festivals, when the lords gathered to trade sake and stories, the younger pages would serve at their sides bright robes, painted lips, eyes lowered but never too low. A musician plucked the shamisen, the melody trembling like breath. The men spoke of battles and betrayals, but the real transactions happened in glances and gestures, the subtle choreography of power. "Come closer," a lord might murmur. "Let me see the mark of your training." A boy would kneel, the lacquered cup balanced on his palms. Around them, laughter covered what could not be named. The fusion of war and desire became its own language. The calloused hand that guided a sword also guided a shoulder. The same lips that spoke of honor whispered commands meant never to be repeated. Each gesture blurred the line between protection and possession until they became indistinguishable. For the boys, escape was unthinkable. To reject a lord's favor was treason. To accept it was survival. Rintaro learned quickly which words pleased, which silences protected. Once, during training, he stumbled. The master struck him across the face with the wooden blade not in anger, but as demonstration. "Control," the man said softly. "Even in pain, control." Blood traced the edge of Rintaro's mouth. He bowed and thanked him. Outside, the castle walls caught the afternoon sun. the banners rippling like tongues of flame. From afar, it looked like order. Up close, it smelled of sweat, sake, and fear. By the end of the 16th century, the practice of wakashu-do, the way of the youth, was woven into samurai identity. Manuals spoke of refining boys through loyalty, and portraits showed warriors resting a hand lightly on a boy's shoulder as if to claim both guidance and ownership. Aesthetics masked appetite. Poetry covered what could not be said in daylight. When Rintaro reached manhood, the Lord dismissed him with ceremony. "You have served well," Katayama said. "Now you may serve the world." The boy bowed deeply, but his hands trembled. Freedom, he realized, was another kind of exile. Once beauty faded, a wakashu became invisible, too old to be precious, too marked to be ordinary. He left the castle under a sky the color of burnt copper. Behind him, drums sounded for a coming battle. He would fight, perhaps die, wearing the crest of the man who once claimed to own him. History remembers the generals, not their attendants. Yet in the folds of old letters and the brushstrokes of forgotten paintings, the truth remains these boys were forged like blades, used, admired, and quietly discarded. And sometimes, when wind rustles through abandoned training yards, one might imagine the faint echo of practice swords metal meeting air, followed by a softer sound, half sigh, half prayer. Whether it belongs to a warrior or a boy, no one can say. You sit under a red lantern while clients choose you like a play performed to order. The light stains your skin the color of lacquered wine. Outside, the rain falls in thin threads, washing the filth from streets that will never be clean. You smile when told, bow when called, and pray the next name spoken is kind. The Edo night had its own rhythm, wooden clogs on wet stone, paper lanterns flickering above narrow canals, and the low hum of shamisen strings bleeding through the mist. In Yoshiwara, pleasure was not sin, it was commerce, signed and sealed. Behind the brothel doors, boys known as kagema were trained to entertain, recite poetry, pour tea, and offer what could not be written in contracts. The trade was born from transformation. Temples once cloaked exploitation in piety, samurai in honor. The merchants of Edo wrapped it in silk and called it artistry. Beauty became a product, youth a brand. Inside the yukaku, the licensed quarter, nothing existed without a ledger. In a back room lit by a single oil lamp, an owner named Kyoji unfurled a scroll before a visiting investor. The parchment crackled as he pointed with his pipe stem. "Here," he said, tapping a column, 3 years indenture for the boy Haruto. Purchased at 17 ryo, repayment expected within 5. Includes training, wardrobe, and introduction fees. The investor nodded, eyes moving down the neat rows of numbers. "And profit?" Kyoji smiled thinly. "Guaranteed. He's clever, speaks well, and has the kind of face that draws both poets and officials." He inhaled, exhaled smoke that hung between them like fog. "Charm is an investment, my friend. Flesh depreciates, but reputation, that sells itself." Haruto, the boy in question, knelt outside the paper screen, listening. The scent of tobacco and ink mingled with damp cedar. He had been here only 6 months, yet he knew the script by heart. A new boy cost silver, an old one cost nothing at all. His days began with lessons in speech, how to flatter without flattery, how to laugh at a lord's dull joke, how to pour sake so that the reflection of the drinker's face trembled in the cup just so. "Conversation is survival," the matron whispered once, adjusting his robe. "They may not buy your words, but they'll remember how they felt when you spoke them." Evening brought performance. Clients drifted in, each expecting a mirror for their vanity. Officials with tired eyes, poets seeking muses, lonely merchants who mistook coin for affection. Haruto would kneel, smile, and say, "May your fortune increase as the moon waxes." Sometimes he believed himself, most times he did not. In the main hall, laughter echoed like coins clinking in bowls. Music masked negotiation. Behind closed screens, contracts were amended, debts extended. Every gesture, every breath, carried value. When Haruto caught the eye of a magistrate one night, Kyoji marked it down in his ledger before the candles burned out. "Favor leads to patronage," he told the boy. "Patronage buys freedom eventually." But freedom was arithmetic, and the math rarely balanced. For every kimono borrowed, every gift received, the debt grew. By the time Haruto turned 19, the number beside his name had tripled. He was worth too much to release. Edo's government pretended regulation was protection. Inspectors walked the streets with scrolls, ensuring the quarters obeyed the shogun's laws. They counted bodies the way farmers counted crops. "No underage sales," one decree read. "No unlicensed exchanges." Yet the ink was dry before the brothels found ways around it. Names changed, birth records blurred. The red lanterns kept burning. In the physicians' logbooks of the time, another story flickered one of sickness. "Wasting fevers," they called it. The boy's beauty, so carefully maintained, began to decay. The same faces that once drew patrons now drew pity. Haruto saw it in others first, the trembling hands, the hollow cheeks. When the cough came to him, he hid it behind a smile. Clients preferred illusion. Still, he performed. He wrote haiku for the patrons who fancied themselves poets. Lantern light trembles. Coin falls into quiet rain. Names fade like footprints. One night, an earthquake shook Edo. Lanterns shattered, roofs split open, and fire raced through the quarter. In the chaos, ledgers burned, contracts curled into ash. Haruto stumbled into the street, barefoot, the red glow of flames painting the rain. Around him, the air stank of oil and smoke, but also something strangely clean like the world for a moment, forgetting its debts. When dawn came, Yoshiwara lay in ruins. Officials promised reform, new inspections, a more moral order. Yet as carpenters rebuilt the brothels, new lanterns were hung, and the trade resumed before the ashes cooled. The city called it recovery. The boys called it return. And in the first house to reopen, under a fresh crimson lantern, Kyoji sat writing new contracts. His brush moved steadily, as if nothing had burned at all. Some said that on quiet nights, if the wind passed through the quarter just right, the flame inside each lantern flickered blue a ghost's color. Perhaps they were only stories, or perhaps they were memories, still buying their way out of the dark.